Sup people, Multiplier here, and today a long overdue tutorial where I basically tell you all about the mixing idea, super fundamental idea that kicks need to be hitting 0 dB, and that when you're mixing you work around the kick, so you build everything around your kick. So this is kind of like a two-part thing where basically you have to understand the concept and be able to visualize it, and once you kind of understand what's going on with like the raw waveform, you need to figure out a way of running your workflow, running your mixing so that you can get to where you want to be. So I'd say the important part is understanding what's going on, so I can probably show you that. Because when I say kicks it in 0, that might not make sense unless you've been producing for a while. So if I show you in Tractor, Tractor Pro 2, because you have these lovely coloured waveforms, you can see what's going on a bit better. So we have the waveforms here. If you haven't seen Tractor Pro 2's waveforms before, basically red means bass, blue means treble, colours in between means in between bass and treble, so like mid-range and shit. So you can see kind of whether there's a red bit, that means it's normally a kick or a bass. So depending on the track, you see like here, see they've got these big long kicks, you can see they're the kicks. So as you can see here, the kicks are right up to the top, that means they're hitting 0. In case you're really new to this, and the way the file works is 0 dB is like the loudest bit, and then like silence is minus infinity, and then everything else is in between. Now in reality, the noise floor is like minus 90 odd decibels, so in reality you're talking from minus 90 to 0. But yeah, basically 0 is the loud bit, quieter bits are all in minus numbers. So if I load up another track, we can see here in the Pop That bootleg, kicks are also hitting, even though they're quite messy kicks, they are hitting 0. If you load up Lick It, you can see kicks hitting 0 as well. Now you got all your other bass and mid-range shit going up to 0, but importantly the kicks are going up to 0 too. That's worth noting, when I say the kicks hitting 0, that's only must apply in like the main bit of the song. For intros, you can see here, like the kick isn't fully up to 0. So for breakdowns, for intros, stuff like that, you don't need the kick hitting at full power. But for the main bits of tracks, you definitely need your kicks hitting 0. So I highly recommend, even if you don't have a copy of Tractor 2, get a demo or pirate it or something and just load up 50 of your, not 50 maybe, but just 20, 25 of your favourite songs and just analyse them. So you can see what the kicks are doing, how loud they are, you can see what the dynamics are doing, you can see like how much quieter the breakdowns are relative to the main bit. You can see how the side chains are working, you can see what the treble's doing, you can see what everything's doing if you just kind of analyse it in the waveform. Because using your ears is good, but it's not as accurate. So use your eyes, analyse shit, because if you want to sound like your favourite producer, you've got to be analysing what they're doing and kind of pick out the good bits to kind of figure out exactly what they're doing right and which bits you want to emulate. Cool. So hopefully you can see from bringing up a few, maybe if I bring up one more. You can see even in dubstep where the bass is quite loud too, if you pick out the kicks, you can see they hit 0 too. So hopefully you've somewhat got an idea now of what I mean when I say the kicks hit 0. The kicks have got to be the bit that go right up to the top of the waveform. So now you've got that kind of idea in your head, super important you do. No point watching the rest of this if you haven't. Let's see about how we can kind of do our mixing to get to where we want to be. It's also worth noting, if you don't know what a compressor or a limiter is, some of what I say might not make too much sense, so it might be worth having a quick look up what they are and what they do. Yeah, I will talk about compressing and limiting like you do know what I mean. Cool, so there's two main approaches people use to getting those kicks to be hitting 0. Now there are other ways to do it and like combinations of the two, but to be honest, it just gets really complicated, and then unless you really know what you're doing, you're just going to make things difficult for yourself, and then you're going to be kind of like fixing. It's almost like you're making life difficult for yourself, so you're going to try and make up for mistakes earlier, and then it's almost like you one step forward, 2 steps back, and it just, before you know it, you've made a big mess of everything. So I really suggest you choose one of these main two approaches and stick with it, or just know both, and then whichever you feel like doing, do it. So I'm going to talk about probably the way that I don't do first, just because it's a little bit easier to understand. So I'd say it's the way that like Laid Back Luke, for example, relatively famously does it. is basically what you do is you set the track levels of your stuff to be exactly where you want them to be, and then you kind of have all your compressors and the limiters on your master channel as you're going on. So it's almost like you're mastering as you're going along. That's what people are doing when they say mixing into a limiter or mixing into a compressor. I'd say the producing world is relatively split between people who do this and people who don't. I personally don't, for my own reasons, but the easiest way to understand what's going on if you do it this way. So what you'd want to do is you have all your basic mastering compressors and limiters on the master channel that controls peaks and all that kind of stuff, peaks and levels. And then what you do is, if you had, say, your kick channel, you would set your kick channel so that it was peaking at exactly 0. And that way, when it goes into the master, it's going in at exactly 0, and then your master's not squishing your kick and doing whatever you want, unless you do want your kick to be kind of squished with a compressor or a limiter in the mastering, in which case you'd have your kick above 0. But I find it easier to get your kick sounding exactly what you want and then don't squish it in mastering. So have your kick hitting exactly 0. Now it's worth noting in Ableton, by default it comes like that. You see how my mouse has changed to that cool little symbol? Drag it up and you can see exactly what your channels are doing. So for example, if I just play a bit of this, you can see all these numbers are where the meter has peaked. So it's really important to, if you haven't already, start looking at these meters and start having like a mental image of what ways they're doing what as they mix together, so you can kind of see what's going on. Because if you haven't got a visual idea of what's going on, it's really, really hard to mix properly and get the most out of it. So yeah, that's one way of doing it. Basically set the kick at 0 and set all your other channels exactly where you want them to be, and then, but as you're producing and as you're mixing, have everything already turned on the master to kind of bring it back together, like compress it all and limit it together. It is a nice way of doing it, simply because it means you can set things a lot more accurately. So if, say, you're making dubstep and you know you want the sub bass to be, I don't know, 3 or 4 dB below the kick, set the kick at 0, set the sub bass channel to exactly, say, 3 dB down, and then you know that your sub bass is set exactly where you need it to be. Nice and simple. And your mastering stuff, everything on the master bus will take care of it for you. So that is the nice way about that. The reason I don't personally do that, I won't get into, just because that's probably a 10-minute discussion in itself, but that is one way of doing it, the easiest way of doing it. The way I do it is I basically have nothing on the master channel. Ignore this, because basically what this for is if I want to hear what's going on with the low end, I just high pass it. Well, I think I turned that on at the same time. So yeah, when I'm producing and I want to hear what's going on with the low end, I high pass it so I can hear very exactly what's going on with the sub end of things. But yeah, I basically have that turned off. I have nothing on the master, and I turn everything down so that it's not clipping. Now what that means is, you say I got my kick channel here, I have to turn it down so low that it's in fact only going up to -9 dB, and that is in fact the loudest bit of all my, loud's the wrong word, it's the highest peaking thing of all my channels. So no matter where you look along here, you won't see anything higher than -9, ignoring groups that like put everything together. That way the kick will always be the loudest bit. And then what I'll do is I'll basically turn it up in the mastering stage. So I'll have my mix where everything's quite quiet, but the kick is still the loudest bit, in this case up to -9, and then I'll turn it up in mastering and do it later. Now that's slightly harder because you have to kind of set your levels knowing that you're going to turn it up later, so it'll sound really quiet now, but you know that you'll make it loud later. So it's just a different way of approaching it. So it's like the way before, you set the levels of all your tracks as where you want them to be, and kind of mix into the master bus that's kind of controlling peaks and mashing it all together as the final product to be. My way, I say my way, just the other approach, the approach that I use, you have you turn it all up at the mastering stage, but while you're working, you have it all quite quiet, but your kick is still the loudest bit. That's the crucial bit. So have a look at the meters and see what's going on. Saying all that, sometimes you can get in a bit of a muddle with these things, so it's always worth, especially when your first few times you kind of start trying to mix with this philosophy. After you finish, have a look at the waveform. Again, I highly recommend Traktor Pro 2 because of the color waveforms. You can really see what's going on. But if you don't have Traktor 2, just literally load it up into Ableton and look really carefully at which bits are doing what. Have a look at all the meters, have a look at the waveform, and figure out how high the kick is hitting, because it's really, really important. But yeah, seriously, just get Traktor Pro 2 to analyze the waveforms, especially when you're starting out. It's really good to be able to visualize what's going on. Really, really helps. Cool. How long's that been? 10 minutes. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so quick sum up. Understand what's going on and figure out the best way of doing it. Oh yeah, I should probably say one of the advantages of doing it, of mixing in one of these two ways I just suggested, is that it means in the mastering section, your compressors and limiters are always being triggered by the kick, which is really, really important because it just makes things so much easier. While you can have it not being triggered by the kick, it just makes things kind of difficult. So if say you've got a bass thing that you want to be nearly as loud as the kick, but you know you need to limit it or compress it like mad, it's just a bit easier if you do that in the mixing stage, kind of get it all like flattened out or whatever you want to do before it hits the master bus. So that way, when it hits the master bus, your kick and possibly your snare is the only things that are triggering the compressors and the limiters, and it's just a lot easier to see what's going on that way. And you're not trying to. It's not like one arm's fighting the other arm. It's just a lot easier that way. So it's just a good habit to get into. So cool. That's been that. Hopefully you've understood what I said. It can be a tricky thing to explain because it's quite a visual thing. But hopefully you kind of at least have an idea what I'm talking about now. If I've been completely useless, let me know. But yeah, hit me up comments on YouTube, or if it's important, message me on Facebook, because I do my best to respond on YouTube, but YouTube is just useless at letting people respond to comments in any kind of efficient way if you get more than like 2 comments a week. So yeah, I've been Multiplier. Check me out on Facebook, all that kind of stuff. Links below. Yeah, sweet. Enjoy mixing, and yeah, if there's any more mixing topics, do let me know. This is the one I've been asked about the most, so at least I've done a video for it now. Sweet. Laters, y'all.